Hello, everybody. Welcome to Time and Clades. I am Albert,
And I'm Joan.
and we are back after taking a week off. So this is our first show that we're recording in April, and so this is going to be our monthly news episode where we talk about nature news from the previous month, which was March, of course. Uh, Before we get started, how are you doing? Did you like your break?
Yeah, it was really nice. I went to go see my sister and her husband in Charlotte, and we had a good weekend. Hanging out, eating ridiculous amounts of candy and pizza and fried Chinese food. So we had a really good time.
Sounds great.
Um, what about on your end?
So I haven't done anything too differently the past couple of weeks. I'm still, really busy with research stuff. I'm really trying to pull everything together so I can actually write my thesis or finish writing it at least. So that's still going, and it'll probably be still going for the next few weeks or so. And there are some other things that I'm busy with too, but I can't really talk about them much. Um, and also, I guess a somewhat notable occasion was, of course, we passed the 1st of April, which is April Fool's Day. Um, and usually on April Fool's Day, I have a tradition, which is to write special blog posts for it. And, you know, years ago, it used to be that I would write some kind of fake discovery uh, about things that I'm interested in, like dinosaurs. Uh, like I remember one of the previous such posts I made while I was an undergrad in college was something like all flying animals form a clade, so that birds and pterosaurs and bats and insects and airplanes were all related to each other in one clade, excluding non-flying animals. Um, things like that, and that was definitely a very popular kind of a tradition that a lot of science news outlets and science bloggers would do, um, which was kind of why I started because I was inspired by those, and they seemed really funny to me at the time. Um, and I always thought that these were blatantly fake and no one would ever take them seriously and all of that. But increasingly, um, people have expressed the sentiment that such inside jokes are kind of counterproductive to science communication, because even if you think that you're being really obvious, there will be people who will likely take these things seriously, and these posts remain up long after April Fool's Day, so sometimes people miss the context of when they were originally posted and all of that. And
Yeah.
yeah, and thinking back, there definitely have been times when I made jokes that I thought were obvious and that numerous people did not get. Um, so kind of starting a few years back, I stopped making writing such blog posts. Um, but I have tried to continue a sort of tradition on April Fool's Day, and that's basically that uh, I will I will write a post that is not strictly about the main theme of my blog. So I usually blog about Maniraptor dinosaurs, and usually Maniraptor paleontology specifically. Um, but on April Fool's Day, I'll basically come up with some other topic. Often it's still related to paleontology, but not directly fitting within the usual kind of scope of my blog. This year, I actually wrote about songs about paleontology because I have very idiosyncratic musical tastes. A big chunk of my music collection is basically songs that are about science, and among them, of course, are many songs that are about paleontology. And I think a lot of people don't realize that such songs actually exist, but there are actually quite a few. So I kind of talked a little bit about some of my favorites in that blog post. That's something kind of unusual that I did last couple of weeks. Other than that, yeah, it's pretty much same as usual for me.
Well, sweet deal. Well, we'll have to be sure to put a link in the description to
I
that
suppose I
recent
should. Yeah.
post because yeah, I mean, I love hearing all the different songs that because you share a lot of them as well, and
Hmm.
even I'm like, oh wow, there's a song about this. This is
Right.
perfect. Of course, you gave us some musical stylings recently for the Homo sapiens episode. I really appreciated that.
Oh yeah, thanks. Yes, indeed, indeed. Yeah, I've been collecting these songs for long time. I mean, even like since I was a kid, I've always enjoyed listening to this type of song, um, even sometimes I am surprised by the fact that songs about certain really obscure topics exist, and yeah, it's really amazing. I think that there are you know musical artists who are invested enough and skilled enough to turn very arcane subjects into this kind of artistic form that, in theory, like most people can enjoy because we all like music to some extent, I think.
Yeah. No, and I absolutely agree. It is really a skill to like. I mean, it's one thing to like write, your average, song,
Hmm.
ballad, whatever. Then like to take like a scientific subject,
Right.
sometimes a complicated one, like I don't know, plant evolution,
Right.
and then turn it into a song that can like teach as well as like have a nice beat. That's something.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
amazing to me.
I agree. I agree. That's definitely something that draws me to these songs. And songs about science is not really a musical genre, right? Like you can make it in any kind of music that you want. So
Yeah.
yeah, so they are actually quite diverse. I think people when people hear the idea of songs about science, they might think it has to be very kind of dry, and but it doesn't have to be. Like it can come in many forms. So yeah, I decided to write a bit about that. Um, yeah, do you have anything else to update us on?
Not particularly. No, things are pretty normal otherwise.
Mm. Well, I'm glad you had a good break. And I suppose we can get into our news articles. So the March was really good for a lot of good nature news. We had a heck of a time um, trying to pick which ones we wanted to talk about because there were so many good ones this month.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but eventually we managed to narrow it down to a few, and I think we're covering quite some varied ground here, so I guess we can get started. So on the next slide, we're going to start off with one of my news items that I picked. And this one, okay, so this one, when I saw it, I knew I had to talk about it because, gosh, this is a absolutely remarkable discovery, and you've probably already seen news articles about it because it did receive quite a bit of press, but it is really ridiculous. Like, it's absolutely amazing. So this was a study on sea slugs in the genus Elysia, um, and something unusual that they do. So the authors of this paper observed two species of these Elysia sea slugs uh, shedding their own bodies. Um, yeah, and so they call this extreme autotomy. And autotomy, in the context of zoology, usually refers to cases where animals will deliberately break off pieces of themselves. So, of course, a very famous example is in lizards, where they will shed their tail to escape from a predator. So the tail kind of acts as a distraction while the lizard runs away. Um, and they observed autotomy in these sea slugs, but it's a very extreme form of autotomy where they actually shed their entire bodies other than the head, or I guess really what they're doing is separating the head from the rest of the body. um, and the rest of the body contains most of the important internal organs, right? So their heart is in there, most of their digestive system is in there, their kidneys are in there, but that is all gone. And you don't need me to tell you that if this happened to most animals, they wouldn't live for very long after that. Um, However, it turns out that the younger sea slugs that these researchers observed um, continued to live for quite some time. So older individuals, the heads would die within a few days apparently after doing this. But in younger sea slugs that did this, um, the heads were still able to move around and eat, and within about 20 days they would regenerate their entire new bodies, um, and go on living as if nothing had happened. So, uh, yeah, yeah, this is really remarkable. Um, and certainly we do see very strong regenerative abilities in some animals, like flatworms, for example, are fairly well known for this. Like you can cut a flatworm like in any which way you like, and they'll just regrow a new body from any piece of themselves. But
Yeah, I remember doing that in college.
yeah, that's so cool. Um, yeah, I've never actually had the opportunity to work much with live flatworms, but I remember reading about this when I was a kid, and I really wanted to have a try at keeping some flatworms after reading about that because I thought that was really cool. Um, but in many ways, flatworms have relatively simple kind of body organization by animal standards. So it's not as surprising that they are able to regenerate themselves to such an extent. Whereas sea slugs are quite complex animals. Like they have all the major parts we would expect to see when we think of the word animal. They have a head region with like various sense organs like eyes and all that, and they have a body with a body cavity with the internal organs that we would largely also expect to see in animals. So it's very surprising that sea slugs are able to live for a time, or these particular species at least, are able to live for a time without their bodies and then actually regenerate a new version of the bodies. Um, all right, so you know that's really crazy. Why do they do this? Um, the authors tried a few experiments to figure this out. So it turns out that unlike, say, the shedding of a lizard's tail, these sea slugs probably don't shed their bodies to escape from predators. And the reason that the authors say this is because they basically try to simulate predator attacks on these sea slugs. So, for example, they would try pinching the sea slugs and or squeezing them and so on, and that didn't cause them to break their bodies off. They also noted that the process of breaking off their own bodies takes several hours. So yeah, I could. You can imagine why that wouldn't be so useful if you're trying to escape from predators. If it takes several hours for you to break a part of yourself off while a predator is attacking you, yeah, you're probably not gonna live for very long after that if you try to. But something they did observe was that pretty much all the sea slugs that they saw actually doing this had been parasitized by a copepod, which is a type of crustacean, kind of type of aquatic crustacean, some of which are parasitic, live inside other animals. Um, and so it turns out that it seems that all the sea slugs that broke off their own bodies had these parasites living in them. And so the authors hypothesized that this is actually a way to remove these parasites for the sea slugs, which is quite interesting. So I actually don't know too much about the details about what actually happens when these copepods parasitize these sea slugs, but it is mentioned in the paper that parasitized sea slugs lose reproductive potential basically, and that is something that some parasites will do. They will cause their hosts to be less reproductively successful because they're like, okay, your job now is to feed me, and we don't want you to do anything else extraneous, like having sex or anything like that. So you're not going to breed anymore because I'm living inside you now, and you need to be a good home for me. So it seems that these sea slugs are trying to avoid this fate of never having sex, and they will break off their own bodies to remove the parasites, and eventually regrow new bodies and carry on living as healthy sea slugs, hopefully. Now, this of course brings up the question: how do these slugs do this? How do they survive without most of their bodies? It is not really known. Of course, this this kind of behavior was just discovered, so I'm sure there'll be plenty more that we have to learn about it. But a pretty good possibility that the authors suggest is that these sea slugs are also interesting in that they have another behavior called kleptoplasty. And what this means is that they are able to keep the chloroplasts from the algae that they feed on in their bodies, and then use those chloroplasts to perform photosynthesis and gain energy from that. So of course the chloroplasts are the cell bodies, the organelles that photosynthetic or a lot of photosynthetic organisms use to perform photosynthesis, and the kleptoplasty basically means stealing these plasts. So these sea slugs are stealing the chloroplasts from their food and then using them to gain some of their own energy. So it may be that they don't really need a complete digestive system to survive for a few days. So they can just rely on the chloroplasts that they eat until they can regrow a new body. So we don't know if this is how they survive, but it does seem pretty likely because both of the species that have been observed doing this extreme autotomy have this kleptoplastic kind of ability. And so on the bottom here is a figure from the paper, and from A to D is showing basically the sequence of the slug breaking off its own body and then regrowing a new body. So the body that gets shed is not alive anymore, basically. It just sits there, but the head remains alive. And over time, in the course of 20 days, it's quite remarkable. Like, less than 3 weeks, the slug regrows a whole new body. And on the rightmost image here, what they're showing is that they found that these slugs actually have a sort of breakage plane right behind their head, and so this is the region that pinches off and where the body breaks off from the head. So the fact that they have this specific adaptation to actually shed the body is a pretty strong indicator that this kind of body shedding is a deliberate thing and not just they broke their bodies off by accident or anything like that. So that is really cool, and I think that about covers it for this story. Do you have anything to add?
Well, that's certainly incredible. The breakage point is really interesting to me.
Yeah.
I guess I wonder, like, this genus I'm sure has been studied many times before, and you'd think they would have noticed that little bit there.
Mm.
Like, I'm curious if that's ever been like talked about before or not. Like, what
Yeah,
that might be.
that's a good question, and I don't know. I'm not well versed enough in the sea slug literature, but that does seem quite interesting, and I wonder about that as well. And I suppose even if it had been noticed, it makes sense why people wouldn't realize what the function of it might be, because as mentioned, the sea slugs don't do this when they're being harassed or anything like that. So it might be pretty difficult to actually simulate this behavior in a captive kind of setting, or when you're handling it in any manner. So yeah, I guess it's not surprising to me that we didn't know about this until now. But it would be interesting to see if, like, in older literature, people have commented on this unusual anatomical kind of feature. Yeah, definitely. And I guess while I'm here, I'll just mention that I think gastropods are really underrated in terms of, like, how fascinating they can be. The gastropods are the snails basically, and we call the shellless ones slugs, which happened several times independently. They lost their shells over evolutionary time, and they come in all kinds of shapes and sizes and forms and have all these weird abilities, as can be seen here. And I think people don't realize just how diverse they are all the time.
Oh yeah, I tend to agree. It's a huge group.
Right.
Isn't it? It's something like what, like 20, 30,000 species or more, or something like
I
that.
don't know off the top of my head, but yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot, and you have terrestrial forms and marine forms and freshwater forms, and come in all kinds of weird forms, including some forms that you might not even realize are slugs or snails at first glance. So yeah, I think if people have time, they should definitely get to know the diversity of gastropods more because there are some incredible creatures in there.
Yeah, definitely. I agree.
All right, do we want to go on to your story?
Sure, that sounds good.
Alrighty.
Alrighty, so these two stories were only announced within a couple days of each other, so I thought it would be appropriate to kind of cover them together.
Mm-hmm.
So, adoption within non-human mammals has been observed quite a few times, and there are obvious benefits for any young who find themselves unfortunately abandoned by dead parents, because if they can be cared for by another adult, they face a much better chance of survival than otherwise. And there are benefits to the adoptees themselves, in gaining more valuable knowledge into childcare. Now, among many of the great apes, alloparenting is a common practice where individuals who are not the biological parents of certain offspring help in the care of those same offspring. And we see this a lot with bonobos, as well as their closest relatives, the chimpanzees. These are both members of the genus Pan, and to an extent with gorillas. However, when it comes to adoption, things can get a little bit trickier. The benefits of alloparenting is that the biological parents are always there in the end to provide the most care to the offspring. But once the parents die, the chances that the young will survive tend to become very slim. Now, among chimpanzees, for example, if the mother of an offspring dies, the young is more likely to die. And should they survive, their status within the group is often lower, and thus with less benefits from other members of the troop. There have been cases where chimpanzees and bonobos have adopted orphans from within their own communities.
Mm.
So these species offer rare exceptions to the overall rules of social mammals, much less primates. So it's in this first study by Nohoko Tokuyama and colleagues that provides a very prominent benchmark in primate research. We now have the first recorded instance of a great ape species, other than humans, of course, adopting orphaned young from outside their own community. The study concerned is about bonobos residing in the Luo Scientific Reserve in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. In particular, two females were noted as the adoptees. So one was an elderly individual named Chio, who adopted a roughly 3-year-old female named Ruby, who hailed from an unclear troop in the reserve. They weren't sure from which of the observed troops Ruby belonged to. Chio already had a history of raising children, including a daughter who had left the troop many years ago. And at the time of adoption, she was childless, but experienced, and took very good care of Ruby in the time of observation. The two remained very close, and Chio was seen feeding her and nursing her, as well as carrying her around. Now, the other individual, Marie, was a younger adult, but this instance is distinct in that she was already caring for two offspring when she adopted the roughly 2.5-year-old female, Flora,
Wow.
who was known from a actually known troop and was the biological daughter of a female named Fula, who actually hadn't been seen for a while. So she may have passed away or she may have abandoned her. It's a little bit unclear.
Mm.
But in any case, she was out of the picture. Now, you would think that a chimpanzee rearing 3 babies at once would be a chore. And the observations suggest that it was,
Mm.
but Marie managed to do it all.
Oh.
You can see in this picture here, they all stayed very close together, and Flora played with her new siblings quite a lot. There was plenty of grooming and food sharing and nursing as well. And what is important to note about these two observed instances of adoption is that there were no aggressive behaviors directed towards anyone.
Mm.
The orphaned young were included within their families almost as if they weren't orphans originally. And there were instances where a few select other members of the troop actually acknowledged the orphans and played with them or fed them or groomed them a little bit, but mostly it was between the mothers and the adopted children. So yeah, this study is very exciting to me, and it really emphasizes the social and cultural differences between such closely related species
Mm,
as bonobos and chimpanzees.
mm,
Bonobos, as we've discussed previously, they are famously known for being usually agreeable with their neighbors.
mm,
Two different communities, upon meeting, will usually interact with each other peacefully, or at least tolerably, for about several days or so before they kind of part ways. And during that time, they will share food, they will groom each other, and they'll engage in the typical sexual rubbing
mm,
that is known for bonobos with the strangers, no strings attached. And while there are known cases of aggression between different bonobo communities, and this is usually due to the males, the levels of violence are almost never the same as seen in chimpanzees,
mm.
who are always afraid of other chimp communities and will go to the point of infanticide in some cases between groups. So the fact that bonobos have now been observed raising orphan offspring from other communities really only strengthens this information. And it really provides a bit of a lesson to researchers who like to use chimpanzees, as well as bonobos, as proxies for understanding like the very earliest human communal relationships.
Right.
Our species is certainly well known for adopting orphans who don't belong to our own social groups. And the fact that we seemingly share this behavior with bonobos is interesting. But of course, both lineages of chimps and humans have been separated for over 7 million years, and a lot has happened throughout that time. So, are these adoptive behaviors retained from a common ancestor, only to be lost in chimpanzees? Or are they convergent? Or is something else going on? Who knows? Um, and so, the other study that I wanted to highlight is by Robin Morrison and colleagues. And this concerns mountain gorillas, so much more distantly related species to either humans or chimps.
Mm,
But we're all great apes. And again, it all concerns adoption. And there are many cases where parents have died or even just left the troop due to safety concerns, so abandoning their offspring to a seemingly uncertain future. It was traditionally thought that orphaned gorillas wouldn't survive within their troop.
mm,
Like chimpanzees, there might be serious consequences to their health as well as their status in the group. And this was a worry for the researchers concerned, who were observing the mountain gorillas of the Karisoke Research Center in Rwanda, which incidentally was founded by the Diane Fossey Gorilla Fund, a famous organization. Four mothers in total were observed leaving their troop because the silverback named Kubaha was known to be in poor health. And so it was speculated that their offspring had more of a chance living with the group than staying with their mothers because they were barely able to feed those babies. And so they
mm,
all left. And so, yeah, all the juveniles were quite young. And the researchers were afraid that they all wouldn't survive because they had, yet to gain all the skills needed to care for themselves in the community. Well, thankfully, those fears were put to rest when it was observed that Kubaha, despite his condition, actually adopted all the orphans.
uh-huh.
You know, he allowed them to stay close to him, even letting them climb on his back and play with him. And at night, when the nests were being built, as gorillas do, Kubaha let the babies sleep in the same bed with him. So it was looking pretty clear that these juveniles had a fighting chance.
Mm, mm.
And so this prompted the researchers to look back on the past 53 years of gorilla research
Wow.
at the Karasoke Research Center, just to see if there were other cases like this of adoption by mountain gorillas. And it turns out that there was quite a bit of it. Um, they found that there were, on average, no negative consequences to physical and mental health for the orphan gorillas
Mm,
because the lead silverbacks, as well as other members of the troop, would take an active role in caring for the offspring. The orphans would grow up more or less as healthy as non orphaned young, and in a couple cases, a juvenile male could actually grow up to be a lead silverback. Um, and what was particularly neat was that these adoptions provided benefits for the entire troop. So, typically the loss of a parent in a gorilla troop, and especially if the parents were mothers, tended to create tensions in the group
Mm.
that led to social unrest. So, like mountain gorillas would become competitive, the ranks would shift dramatically, any progress in social learning was significantly reduced. But when one or more members of the gorilla troop would adopt an orphan from one of these lost parents, it actually strengthened the connections of the whole troop,
Wow.
especially for the lead silverback. As the bond between the orphans and him reduced the chances that another gorilla would challenge him because everybody was working together fairly peacefully.
Mm.
And of course, the whole group definitely would benefit from that. So, yeah, studies like this, they really demonstrate some of the unique behaviors that contrast the great apes from other social mammals. Think like elephants and baboons and hyenas, where orphan young have far fewer chances of survival, and the loss of parents tends to lead to social disunity and other troubles. And of course, there are implications for human origins as well.
Mm.
You know, we are another great ape species that will often take care of a lost loved one's offspring and raise them to full health. So, to me, it seems that things like altruism and empathy are being found more and more to run very deep
Mm.
in our evolutionary history. And yeah, that's just amazing to me. That's about all I had to say on that. Albert, was there anything you wanted to add?
Well, I guess first of all, I remember seeing these two studies come out like very close to each other in time, and that's always a fun thing when you have two scientific studies that are thematically similar coming out very close to each other. That's always cool. Um,
Right.
yeah, and I think it's definitely a really interesting behavior for all the reasons that you mentioned, and it's really cool also that to find out about how the adoptees get benefits from doing this as well. As there definitely is potential there to shed light on human origins and human evolutionary history. That is all really fascinating, and I think we definitely I think we definitely shouldn't place kind of human moral judgments on other organisms that aren't our own species, but even so, I do find stories like this to be quite touching. I think nature is not always red in tooth and claw.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something definitely that's been, I think it's being more and more appreciated as more
Hmm.
research is being done.
Right, right.
It is very much a traditional way of thinking about evolution. That it's all competition and nothing else.
Right.
When obviously we're finding that that's not the case completely.
Hmm. Definitely. All right. Should we go on to the next story?
Yeah, next one, I'm actually really excited to hear about.
All right. Yeah, I thought it was really interesting too, which of course is the reason I picked it. So this next story is about lampreys. Yeah, well, I told you we were covering quite a wide kind of spread here in terms of topics. Um, lampreys. Yeah, so lampreys are a type of fish, you could say. Um, and traditionally, they have featured very heavily in discussions about the origin of vertebrates, of all backboned animals. Now, of course, lampreys are living species that are still alive today, so they're not ancestral to the other vertebrates. But the reason people often look at them as potential models or for inspiration for what ancestral vertebrates might have looked like um, is because lampreys are one of the few living vertebrates that lack jaws. Um, And of course, this is an ancestral condition. The very earliest vertebrates did not have jaws, but most of the living ones do. And so people have looked to the very few kind of jawless vertebrates that are still alive today, which are the lampreys and also another group called the hagfishes, um, to maybe get some ideas about how vertebrates might have evolved and what the earliest vertebrates were like in terms of their overall biology. And something quite unusual about lampreys is that their babies, their larvae, are filter feeders. So they lie around at the bottom of bodies of water and they kind of pump water through their oral cavity, through their mouth, and expel water through their gills and filter out little particles of edible material while they're doing this. That's what baby lampreys do. And lamprey larvae have a special name called amocetes, describing their time as filter feeders. And traditionally, this has been thought to be a sort of model for how early vertebrates lived and what they looked like. And I guess just for the record, adult lampreys live quite differently. So most infamously, there are some adult lampreys that are parasites, and so when they grow into adulthood, they have this kind of suction cup shaped rounded mouth. And if you search up lamprey pictures, you can definitely see this prominently on display in many photos. And I'm sure a lot of people consider it to be quite horrifying, and they'll use these sucker-like mouth parts to attach onto usually other fish. I think some of them also parasitize marine mammals, and basically they have a lot of tooth-like structures that kind of line the inside of this suction cup like mouth, and they'll use that to rasp off pieces of flesh from their hosts. So yeah, maybe not the most pleasant thought out there. Um, Now, there are also some lampreys that don't feed at all when they are adults. So they basically kind of take in all the energy they'll need when they're larvae, and then once they grow to adulthood, all they do is breed and then die. So not all lampreys are parasitic. But either way, they do transition away from their kind of larval filter feeding lifestyle. Now, the reason that larval lampreys have been considered a sort of model for early vertebrates comes down to a few things. Well, most notably is that one of the closest living relatives to vertebrates are the lancelets. The lancelets are a group of invertebrates that are closely related to vertebrates, and they look a lot like larval lampreys. They live a lot like larval lampreys too, and so they basically lie down at the bottom of the seabed and filter feed their food. They can swim, especially if they're disturbed. They can kind of swim up into the water column a little bit, but they don't do it too often. Mostly they just sit there and filter feed. Um, and if you weren't aware, lancelets look a lot like larval lampreys. Well, I guess that doesn't help much if you don't know what a larval lamprey looks like. But I have one pictured on the slide. So on this figure, which has many parts to it, of course, but on S, there is a photo of a young living lamprey. And so you can see it's this, you know, vaguely fish-shaped and kind of translucent creature with not very well developed kind of facial features. The eyes are very small, and it does have quite large gill slits for filter feeding, but other than that, it just looks like a piece of a very simplified fish that just doesn't have any special features sticking out of it. And a lancelet looks quite a lot like that too. Um, and so, because of this similarity, it has often been assumed that the ancestral vertebrate was something that was a lot like a larval lamprey or a lancelet, a sort of a vaguely fish-shaped animal that filter fed and lived at the bottom of the seabed. Um, and basically, it was thought that lampreys retained this ancestral form as larvae before evolving kind of their adult form that we know today. And so it is basically long time textbook wisdom that this was what an early vertebrate looked like. And if you want to know what they look like, you look to a lamprey or to a lancelet. Um, and speaking of that, there actually is a classic song about this. Um, so I say classic because most of the lyrics were written in the 1920s. Um,
Oh,
yeah. So basically about the lancelet as a model for vertebrate origins, and I think the chorus goes something like, "It's a long way from Amphioxus. It's a long way to us. It's a long way from Amphioxus to the meanest human cuss. Well, it's goodbye to fins and gill slits, and it's welcome lungs and hair. It's a long, long way from Amphioxus, but we all came from there."
oh wow! I never heard of this one.
Oh, really? Yeah. And there are other verses, but I think I'll just post a link to the full song in the description so you can have a listen to that. And I guess if you weren't aware, Amphioxus was the old genus name for some of the lancelets. However, it turns out that there is an even older genus name called Branchiostoma that should be used as a correct name. Nonetheless, Amphioxus is still sometimes used as a common name, an alternative common name for lancelets. So, in case you did make that connection, that's what the song is about.
Right. I remember seeing like old like evolutionary charts, if you will,
Yeah,
showing like successive stages of like the very earliest vertebrates from like the echinoderms and things.
right.
And yeah, I remember seeing like this this little polyp looking thing turning into a like a lancelet
Hmm.
or evolving into a, the typical fish.
Right.
I think the original Cosmos series even went with like that same graphic too for their fun little ditty that they did, where it's like, oh,
Yeah.
here's stages from bacteria to man,
Right.
so yeah, that is, I guess it's iconic. That goes back years and years.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it makes a lot of sense why people would think that. Um, But then this new study came out, this year, and what they did was they were able to find fossils of larval lampreys from ages past, from millions of years ago, extinct lamprey species, um, from several sites and from several different time periods. And well, what they found actually throws a pretty big monkey wrench into the idea that the larval lamprey is a kind of ancestral condition for vertebrates. So the authors of this paper, which is really cool to see published, by the way, because I actually saw the lead author give a talk about this study during one of the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology conferences. I think that one was 2017. Um, so it's been a while in the making, you could say.
Yeah.
And so they describe the stem lamprey larvae, and so stem group is of course extinct groups that are most closely related to a given living group, but not a member of the kind of living radiation. So these are stem lampreys that are their closest living relatives are the living lampreys, but they are not kind of modern type lampreys. And so these stem lamprey larvae, and these stem lamprey fossils, come all the way from the Devonian and the Carboniferous, from sites in Africa and also North America. Um, and it turns out that there is no evidence whatsoever, even though there are several like kind of growth stages represented here. There's no evidence whatsoever of these lampreys going through an amosete filter feeding stage. Huh. Um, the most complete kind of growth series that they had is the one pictured here, which is a species called, or a genus called Priscomyzon from the Devonian of South Africa. And so on the top left, in A and B, you can see an adult of Priscomyzon. And as you move towards the right, you can see younger and younger individuals being represented. And in the bottom left corner is a hatchling, the youngest individual that they found. Um, And something notable about its growth series is that even the very youngest individuals have well-developed eyes. So if you look at the schematics on here that accompany the fossils, you can see the kind of dark spots close to the front. Yeah, so the front is towards the top, by the way, if you need to orient yourself. And you can see all of them have these dark spots, even the hatchling does. And those are very well developed eyes, quite unlike the tiny pinprick eye spots in a living amosete larval lamprey. And you can see a comparison of the photo of the living lamprey down below. And also the one to the left of it, R, is an even younger hatchling lamprey, which you can see it barely looks like a fish at all. But that was not the case for these extinct lampreys. In addition, you can also see that, especially maybe not as much in the hatchling because of the incomplete preservation, but in the second youngest ones on the right, you can see that the mouth parts have this kind of circular shape, just like they do in adult lampreys. Though they already have that kind of a suction cup-like structure. Uh, yeah, so basically these baby stem lampreys were much like mini adults. They did not go through this kind of amosete phase. And of course, the most complete growth series that they had was of Priscomyzon, but this was the case from what they could tell of the juveniles in other stem lampreys from the Carboniferous as well. So, that's interesting. And furthermore, they did a phylogenetic analysis of these lampreys. And what they found is that these stem lampreys don't form a clade with each other. So if they did, we might be able to say, oh, these stem lampreys were just a weird group that didn't have the amosete stage and lost that stage for whatever reason. But instead, these stem lampreys kind of form a sequential series that are successively closer and closer to modern lampreys. And so that strongly suggests that modern lampreys evolved from an ancestor that did not have an amosete stage. And instead, the amosete stage is a secondary evolution in modern lampreys. It's a special thing that they did. It is not something they retained from a very distant ancestral vertebrate ancestor. So that kind of, tips everything that we thought we knew over on its head. I guess there are a number of questions that arise from this. First of all, is why? Why did this happen? Why did lampreys evolve this weird larval stage that resembles what we thought the ancestral vertebrate looked like? And the author suggests that it has to do with their habitat, and this is because as larvae, all crown lampreys, all living lampreys, live in fresh water. Now, there are some that will migrate to the ocean as adults, but they always return to fresh water to breed, and many species live their entire lives in fresh water. And the author suggests that one possibility is that because filter feeders are much rarer in freshwater environments than in marine environments, this may have been advantageous for larval lampreys in that if they adopted this filter feeding lifestyle, they would face less competition and would be able to survive better. And, whatever the real reason might be, this seems to have worked out for them because we have all these living lampreys that live in freshwater environments, whereas all these stem lampreys that they described in this paper were found in marine environments, and of course they're not around with us anymore. So yeah, that's certainly a possibility. And so overall, kind of the take-home message of this story is that living lamprey larvae should not be used as models for ancestral vertebrates. We should not assume that ancestral vertebrates were just like these Amosita larvae. And on the next slide, I show the phylogeny that they found. So, maybe the resolutions is probably not good enough for you to see and read all the details in the video, but you might be able to make out there are these branches tipped in blue with these kind of blue lines next to them. So those blue lines are meant to represent Amosita larvae, and so these are the crown lampreys. And there's also an early Cretaceous lamprey that we know also has Amosite larvae because that one has fossils of larvae that have been found, and that one is from the early Cretaceous of China, and it also lived in a freshwater lake environment, so that is consistent with the author's hypothesis about the adaptive advantage of an ammoset larvae. Um, of course, being in the Cretaceous, it lived a lot closer in time to crown lampreys, and according to their analysis, it was also much more closely related to crown lampreys as well. So it makes sense that it would, or at least it is consistent that it would have a ammoset larvae. But if you look just above them, you can see a series of sort of red icons with red branch tips, and these are the stem lamprey species that they looked at that don't have ammoset larvae. Um, and so they form a series leading up to being sequentially more closely related to the crown lampreys, and so they strongly suggest that the ancestral condition for the lamprey total group is not having an ammoset larvae, but going through this kind of mini adult stage instead. And something else that is worth mentioning is that the hagfishes, the other group of living jawless vertebrates, don't go through an ammoset phase either. Um, and, well, the problem with hagfishes is that they're really bizarre and highly modified and weird. Yeah, they have all kinds of weird features. Maybe we should talk about them sometime. But it has long been debated, actually, where hagfishes fit into kind of vertebrate phylogeny, or whether they even are vertebrates at all. Like, the kind of traditional idea was actually that hagfishes were the group, the closest living relatives to vertebrates, but are not vertebrates themselves. Um, However, in recent years, the genetic evidence especially has strongly suggested that the hagfishes are actually the closest living relatives of lampreys and not to all vertebrates in general. And so that would mean that the hagfishes are actually nested inside the vertebrate clade and are actually like super weird vertebrates themselves. More recently, morphological studies like this one actually have also supported this hypothesis that the hagfishes are closely related to lampreys, and so they probably have something to say about the ancestral condition of this clade. And they also don't have an ammoset larvae either. So, if early vertebrates weren't like if early vertebrates weren't like larval lampreys, what were they like? Well, to answer that question, the author suggests that, well, first of all, we look to the fossil record and see what are some relatives, some of the earliest close relatives of the lamprey and hagfish group, and also of the jawed vertebrate group, the gnathostomes. What are they like? Do they actually look like larval lampreys? And it turns out not really, because it turns out that if you move to the stem groups of so the cyclostomes are the lampreys and hagfishes together. If you look at stem cyclostomes, you get creatures like the ones I pictured on the right here, the anaspidans. And so these are jawless fish and probably filter feeders, but they don't really look like the kind of very simplified form that you see in a larval lamprey. They actually look like fish, for one. And additionally, they have these bony plates surrounding their bodies, whereas lampreys and hagfishes today do not. And if you look at stem gnathostomes, so the stem group to the jawed vertebrates, you also see kind of jawless armored fish swimming around down there. So it may be that the ancestral vertebrate was not, a very simplified, non-bony, lancelet-like creature, but instead an armored kind of fish that looked much more fishy than we might have expected. And so, I think that pretty much sums up the main gist of this paper. Do you want to add anything?
Um, Not particularly. I mean, this is very fascinating, and I'm often reminded of like some older books that I've read
Mm-hmm.
where they do kind of highlight these like armored fishes as like ancestral. They have something to say about like the ancestral condition
Mm-hmm.
for like early vertebrates, while still mentioning the whole amosite
Right.
thing. Um, I do wonder because I guess my question is 'cause I haven't read this paper in full.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I know the phylogenetic analysis here includes some very like early Cambrian forms.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I see like Hycoichthyes here and Hycoella, for example,
Mm-hmm. Right.
um, and they're kind of funky looking.
They are.
So I'm very curious, like the stages between like those sorts of forms to something like an aspidan.
Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. Things like Milliconmingia and Hycoichthyes. they do look somewhat lancelet-like or larval lamprey-like, and so it may not be entirely false that if you go down to like stem vertebrates or to the ancestral chordate, so a group including the vertebrates and the lancelets, and also a group called the sea squirts, which are pretty odd, that you would get some kind of lancet-like or amosete-like form. So I would say that the implications that this study has really pertain more to crown vertebrates, that the modern radiation of vertebrates, the ancestral condition right at the base there, according to this paper, and I think they make a pretty good case for it, probably was not a lancet-like or amosete-like animal, and more like an anaspidin, or some other kind of armored jawless fish. But yes, I think if you push back earlier than that, it is quite plausible that you would go through rather lancelet-like stages. So in a sense, we're not completely discarding the old model, but more pushing it further back. And it definitely would be really interesting to find out what were the transitional stages between a lancet-like form and a bony anaspidin-like form. Um, and that is not something we currently really have, to my knowledge. So certainly there are some gaps in there for us to fill.
Yeah, definitely new research to look forward to
Hmm.
because that's fascinating. Like it just it seems like it's a lot. Well, of course, as these things tend to be, it's a lot more complicated than a simple model.
Right.
Of course, back in the past, we didn't have like the fossil record was not as good as it is now.
Hmm.
So like researchers were relying more and more on like living forms and those like embryonic stages to
Hmm.
tell us something about like early vertebrate evolution and whatnot.
Right. Exactly.
Like I was just reading an older book from the 1950s, incidentally, and I won't go into too many details about that because
Mm.
we'd be here all day. But a lot of the very early chapters about like the Precambrian and the Cambrian, they spent a lot of time just looking at the lifestyles of a few select living groups like a paramecium or um or a lancelet.
Yeah.
So basically, like, well, we don't have a lot of good fossils from this time, but we think that the
Right.
early animals looked like this and
Right.
behaved this, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So like that makes sense in that context. But of course, now we have studies like this and much newer research and a much better fossil record that
Right.
it clarifies things or maybe complicates things, but that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Right, right, absolutely. And yeah, that was kind of the approach that, of course, Life on Earth took as well. So the classic David Attenborough documentary from the 1970s, where it did show some fossils. It talked about some fossils, but of course, we didn't know everything about the fossil record that we do today. And so a lot of it was spent, looking at living forms that seemed to approximate in some way the ancestral condition for a given group. Um, and yeah, so that was a very common practice back then. And this study kind of gives us a cautionary tale, which I think we keep learning over and over again. It is exactly the kind of practice of assuming certain living groups are approximations of ancestral forms, often just because they retain some kind of notable ancestral feature. Like, of course, lampreys are jawless, so people assume that, oh, well, maybe the earliest jawless vertebrates were just like lampreys, which, given the study, is probably not the case. And this keeps happening over and over again. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's something that just keeps popping up. So another classic example has happened in relatively recent years is that people have assumed, for example, that sharks represent in some ways the ancestral condition for jawed vertebrates. Sharks, of course, are well known for lacking bony skeletons, like their internal skeletons are cartilaginous. And they don't really have much other kind of bone covering at all, like other than their teeth and fin spines and the covering of their skin. They don't really have a lot of bony parts. And so it was assumed that the ancestral jawed vertebrate was something like a shark that didn't have a lot of bone on them, and it was only in the bony fishes, like ourselves, where things became a lot bonier. But then people found out that a group called the placoderms, which are extinct jawed fishes with bony armor covering usually the front half of their body, like their head. Um, it turns out that they probably don't form a clade. They actually form a sequential kind of we call it a grade, successively closer to the jawed vertebrates. And what this suggests is that jawed vertebrates actually descended from a placoderm ancestor with a bony head armor covering themselves. And so instead of being ancestral from a not very bony ancestor, sharks kind of evolved their body form from an ancestor that was armored and then lost a lot of the bone. Whereas we bony fishes kind of kept a lot of the bony features and kind of internalized them. So yeah, again, don't assume that some living group, just because it has some ancestral features, that it is an ideal model for the ancestral condition of its group, because very often, many times when we try to do this, it turns out not to be the case. And just for the record, from studying birds today, I can tell you that a lot of our assumptions about what is ancestral for birds has been assumed based on groups like the tinamous, for example, which are paleonate birds. And if you're not familiar with the terms paleonates or tinamous, you can go listen to my Dinosaurs the Second Chapters series on this channel. They are essentially the less diverse group of the two major lineages of living birds. So you have the paleonates, the ostriches and tinamous and kiwi and so on, and then the neonates, which are everybody else. And people have often used the paleonates to try and infer what the ancestral bird condition was like in some respects. And yeah, I'm going to say that based on my own research, looking at fossil birds and uh, looking at the anatomy of living birds and comparing them to the fossils, I'm going to say that tinamous are not a good model for the ancestral condition in crown birds. Yeah, they are probably very misleading in that regard. Um, so yeah, this kind of thing keeps happening over and over. So again, we really need to keep this in mind when we are trying to interpret the evolutionary history of our favorite groups.
Exactly. Yeah. And the more I think about it, yeah, like this is a problem that has been in paleoanthropology too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and especially in the early years, they had a lot of cultural anthropologists as they were studying, non-Western cultures
Yeah,
and forming their ideas about like what early human societies were like. They
right.
would pull straight from these societies, saying, "Oh, well, there was this stage and this stage and this stage, and these peoples that are much the same as us, maybe a little bit different culturally." Are like remnants of the past and
Right,
tell
right.
us something about early man. And of course, I could go on and on about that, but
Mm-hmm.
likewise, it's far more complicated. And using living groups today and in like the recent past, we're more and more finding that we can learn a lot,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not, as I said, like they're not cheat codes
Right,
to
right.
prehistory. Um, you have to use the archaeology first and foremost before going and making huge claims about past behaviors and
Mm-hmm.
whatnot.
Right, right.
So,
And the paleontology in the case of more ancient forms and groups. Um, yeah, definitely. And that's something that's always worth keeping in mind, is that every species alive today has had the same amount of time to evolve to present days, and they have had
mhm.
exactly the same amount of time to be heavily modified. And so even things that we might think at first glance are not heavily modified might have been. And so that's a I think that's the overarching message of studies like this. Um, is that, yeah, again, don't assume that a certain living group is representative of ancestral stage, and we can certainly look to them to inform us about certain things, like, oh, how do these things feed without jaws, or things like that. But maybe, don't assume that what they're doing is what the ancestral forms are doing, because that often turns out not to be the case, as we've seen here. All
Right.
right.
It's a good lesson.
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely. It's definitely a form of thinking that it's very hard for us to shake off, but I think we definitely should make effort to do so. Um, do we want to go to our final story now?
Yeah, sounds good.
Alrighty.
This one is definitely a treat because
Yeah.
it's a first time for through time and clades. because we're going to talk about plants.
Wow.
Yeah, and plant evolution in particular. This story is really, really cool, so I wanted to include
Hmm,
it.
hmm,
Okay. This paper is by Jun Wang and colleagues and is about a group of extinct plants called noeggerathiales, which is represented by 50 poorly known species that grew in Eurasia and North America from the late Carboniferous period to the end of the Permian period. And so they were witnesses to the Great Dying.
hmm.
I say poorly known because we've had yet to find a complete specimen of one. All we've had over the past 200 years or so have been assorted leaves and sporophylls and other plant parts, but nothing from like stems. So we really had no idea how these plants were built, how tall they could be, how these structures fit with each other.
Hmm.
It was all very confusing. Paleobotanists, so people who study ancient plants, had suggested affinities with a group called Polypodiopsidae. So that's the ferns and the horsetails.
Hmm.
And they've suggested relationships with stem vascular plants, so plants with vascular tissue, called progymnosperms. And these are supposed to be the ancestral forms to the living seed plants.
Hmm.
So the gymnosperms, that's conifers and ginkgos and cycads, and the flowering plants or angiosperms. We were just talking about grades not too long ago.
Hmm.
Progymnosperm is a grade. It's a paraphyletic term, kind of like thecodont
You're
or
right.
a strachoderm, where these organisms do share a common ancestor, but they're usually thought of to the exclusion of some descendant
Right,
groups.
right.
Um, so all of this now has changed thanks to this study. And here we have a description of a brand new species of noeggerathialean called a Paratingia wuhaia. This is from the early Permian Taiyuan Formation of China. We have quite a number of specimens, over 200 in all, and they are fairly complete. We have stems, we have leaves, we have sporophylls, sexual organs, and everything. And it's because like these have been preserved in volcanic ash, which have like retained a lot of structures that would otherwise have dissolved away through other fossilized methods. And so researchers have been able to finally, after all these years, reconstruct one of these plants as accurately as possible. And now we have this beautiful illustration to the right to kind of demonstrate this. So Paratingia looked a lot like a tree fern, but it was different from them. So it had the similar reproductive style to ferns, using spores. Um, However, the presence of woody bark and so a conifer-like secondary xylem, these are like layers within the stem that help transfer water to the other parts of the plants. Those are very notable, and they are more in common with seed plants and with the other progymnosperms that I talked about earlier. And it's because these remains were so complete that researchers could actually perform a cladistic analysis, a phylogeny, to determine their relationship. And it was revealed that indeed, noeggerathialeans are progymnosperms,
Hmm.
and they actually lay within a sister group to the seed plants proper.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, that effectively solves this over 200-year-old mystery
Wow.
in paleobotany. In fact, and this is kind of neat, their closest relatives that were included in the study, it includes a very famous fossil plant called Archaeopteris. So, not Archaeopteryx,
Right.
Archaeopteris. It's a similar sort of name. I say famous because this is one of the oldest of the truly large woody trees that
Hmm.
first evolved in the Devonian as plants were conquering the land. Now, the phylogenetic position is notable in that it effectively reveals two things about this early land plant evolution. And one is that, for one, it confirms that the progymnosperms diversified alongside the true seed plants.
Hmm.
The lineage had evolved from within the progymnosperm grade, but these two groups were still like coexisting with each other in the late Paleozoic world. and they were occupying important roles within the global environment as much as the seed plants did. Um, and then two, the incorporation of the noeggerathiales within this artificial group effectively extends that group's range to the end of the Permian.
Mm.
Progymnosperms were traditionally understood to have died out like early in the Permian, because of competition with the seed plants, which were supposed to be quote unquote better
Right.
at doing what they did than the progymnosperms. But it now seems clear that despite this coexistence with seed plants, their loss at the end of the Permian in the Great Dying was most likely a result of their anatomical features and their reproductive strategy. They failed to keep them alive while all these other lineages of plants persisted, including the true ferns as well as the seed plants. Um, in the end, however, this study is a crucial step in the right direction for kind of unraveling the mysteries of early land plant evolution. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, like truly complete fossils
Mm.
of land plants are very hard to come by. I mean, you might get leaves, you might get stems, you might get seeds, and they're not necessarily all like associated together. And of course, then I could get on my soapbox about the whole convention of giving scientific names to all these different parts of the
Right.
plants, even though they might be one species, which is confusing to like read and to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but with sites like this, the Tianyuan Formation has been called the vegetational Pompeii for its
Mm.
like exceptional preservation. They're already proving super valuable in
Yeah.
revealing lost details like this, as well as opening up research into early Permian ecology.
Right.
It's always welcomed. Uh, but yeah, that's all I had to say on this. Albert, is there anything you wanted to add?
Not too much, but it definitely is a fantastic discovery, and it's really exciting that such a long-held mystery has been resolved. It's almost like our version of or rather their version of a Dinochirus, isn't
Yeah,
it?
it is.
Yeah.
Mysterious parts that could be that we have like a rough idea where they are, but there's just yeah, exactly.
Right, right. Yeah, and it really is like you say because the parts of plants the problem with the plant fossil record is that the different parts of plants are often preserved as separate kind of things. Like the leaves are usually found in isolation, and then the roots are found in isolation. The pollen is found in isolation,
Hmm.
and then each of those gets their own names, which for people who work on animals is definitely not an ideal situation. But I guess the paleobotanists don't have much choice because most of the time they can't actually associate what which parts belong to the same plants or not because they just aren't found in association. Um, so yeah, fossils like this are definitely fantastic for resolving conundrums like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's all I have to say. But I'm definitely glad to to see the paleobotanists get their Dinochirus.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully in the future, we get more really cool paleobotany stories we can
Yes.
talk about because yeah, like this is really our first time covering it, and
Hmm.
uh, of course I'm not an expert on
Oh,
paleobotany.
me neither.
My interests are, yeah, our interests are in other areas, but it's good information to know, and
Yeah. Mm.
with these new discoveries, we're learning as much as everybody else.
Hmm. Yep. Absolutely.
But yeah, that's pretty much the end of this story for now.
That's right. Mm.
I guess, as per usual, we want to thank our good friends Henry and Elysia for their contributions to this series. Of course, Henry gave us the wonderful theme music,
Hmm.
and Elysia provided the color scheme for Albert's Alvarezsaur avatar. And I also want to throw a quick shout out to Mario Corio and the rest of Paleobotany Twitter. So, when I was reading about this study, I was having a pain in the ass time trying to pronounce noeggerathialean because it's one of those words that you read, and as much as I kept trying to like sound it out, I just came up with like 10 different pronunciations. So I'm like, okay,
Right.
how about this? You go to the experts and see what they had to do.
Right.
um, And I single out Mario Corio in particular because he actually like broke it down a little bit for me. He's like, just pronounce the beginning like the E and get,
Mm,
and the rest I could kind of figure out from there.
right.
That's typical paleobotany plant speak.
Right. Right.
These larger groups of plants, they all kind of follow the same naming convention. So if you can figure out how to pronounce one ending, you can pretty much get all of them.
Mm, mm.
Um, Others who had a more comical approach, they said, okay, well, just point a stick or a laser at the word and say this plant.
Right.
Of course, that would be helpful if I was in a a more
Like,
live
right.
like
Lecture room
live
setting.
context. But I don't think we can do that on here. I mean, I guess we could use the mouse to.
Yeah, we could coordinate. I could point to, but yeah, no, I think it was easier for you to say it directly.
Right, because I mean, we are like kind of a podcast, so not everyone's going to be like looking at the screen
That's
twenty
true.
four
Yeah.
seven. So it helps to be able to like say and to learn these names because I mean, listen, if we can say like Tchaikovsky and Dostoevsky and all these kind of things, I can say the name of this friggin' extinct plant group. So thank you all at Paleobotany Twitter. I love y'all, and we'll be sure to drop Mario Corio. We'll drop your Twitter handle. Go follow him. He does really cool stuff with
Yeah,
plants.
he has a good blog on paleobotany too. So yeah, I'll try to remember to link that.
But yeah, so other than that, of course, speaking of Twitter, we are there. You can follow us, and then we have our updates, and we post links to all of our new episodes at Time Clades. Of course, that links to our YouTube page through Time and Clades, where if you can see our playlists of our past shows and as well as our previous news series. And you can also leave comments, drop any questions. If you have any questions at all about natural history or paleobotany or whatever, we'll do our best to answer them. You can leave a comment or give us an email, timingclades@gmail.com. We always appreciate your wonderful comments. And as always, for every episode, we include references and relevant links in the description if you want to read these news stories or just anything else about relevant topics. They are there for y'all.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, that is the end. I do believe next week we're going to jump into your series, Albert. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe so. So we're gonna go back and look at bird evolution, and specifically, we're gonna look at some of the groups of birds of prey. So we'll talk about hawks and eagles, and also owls as well. Um, and yeah, they're definitely a fascinating group that has held very important positions in human culture. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. And then, of course, after that, we'll continue with my series
Hmm.
on human origins, and we'll look at the period following the end of the last glacial maximum and
Mm.
the early Holocene period. So, what were human beings doing after the Ice Age and in the subsequent periods before agriculture was developed
Mm.
in different parts of the world? So, we got some good stuff coming for y'all soon. Um,
Fascinating.
yeah, until then, thank you all so much for joining us, and we will see y'all next time.
Yep. Take care, everybody.